Welcome back to Ryan Fire Stories. Sit back, relax, and enjoy today's stories. What's the creepiest or most unexplained thing you've seen in broad daylight? Story 1. I used to live on a farm, and one morning there was a full horse leg on our driveway. Still had part of the hip attached and was fresh. We sprinted down to our horse paddock to find all our horses completely fine. We disposed of the leg and never got an explanation. Very creepy. This happened in Canberra, Australia, so there's no mountain lions or bears around here. Story 2. My dad, brother, and I went to a movie theater one day in Florida. It was around 4ish, so it was getting darker, but still light out. We went up to the front where you buy tickets, and when we looked around, there was absolutely no one in the movie theater at all. No employees, no other guests. We simply walked in, looking all around to try to find anyone we could to purchase a movie ticket, but could find no one else. All the movies in each of the theaters we checked were running, but with no one else inside. So we just sat down and watched the movie, then left without seeing anyone else the whole time. It was very surreal. Story 3. It was 1984. I was 15 years old and was alone at my older sister's house. It was late morning. I had just got out of the shower, still wrapped in a towel when I heard a noise outside. I looked out a window and watched a complete stranger tying the doorknob of the main entrance to the railing of the deck with a rope I used to walk the dog with. He then leaned a mop that was on the deck against the door. I called my sister, told her what happened, got dressed, and got the heck out of the house through a different door and hid in the bushes until the police arrived. The house was somewhat remote with no close neighbors. Found out later that the door he tied up was unlocked. No clue how long he had been lurking around before I knew of his presence. To this day, we have no idea who that was and what his motives were. Beyond creepy, definitely unexplained. Story 4. When I was young, me and my cousins found a bloody shirt in our woods. My cousins and their parents hunted, so we thought maybe it was from that. But then we found a Ziploc bag with shoes and shorts. All had to be from an extremely petite woman or an older kid. When we told our uncle about it, we got punished and weren't allowed to talk about it. I don't speak to them anymore, but really makes you wonder. Story 5. While this can be explained, the image still creeps me out to this day. It was around the time of planking craze. I had no idea what it was and hadn't heard anything about it. Got a taxi into town and was walking around the city center, and life was normal. I then took a turn into the town square, and there was around 200 people planking everywhere on everything. I don't know what was going on. I thought there may have been gunshots or a bomb, or maybe the world was ending. I then asked someone next to me and they explained it and we laughed it off, but for that brief moment in time, I'll never forget that uneasy feeling. Story 6. I believe there's a name for this phenomena, but I would never know how to go about Googling such a thing. But this was around 2013 or so, and I was having a smoke in front of my apartment on the front steps in the middle of the day, around noon or so. I got up to head back, and just for a few fleeting seconds while looking at the building, it looked totally unfamiliar. I knew I lived there. I knew it was my home. I knew I had just stepped outside only 5 minutes previously, but my brain was giving me some kind of indication that I had never seen this place before, and that there was danger inherent. I just kind of violently wagged my head back and forth, like an aggressive no gesture, and was immediately back to normal. But I'll never forget that moment. It was like my concept of reality had very momentarily just cracked. Story 7. A man with freshly exposed bone on his arm and missing a substantial amount of skin and muscle walked up to me in a parking lot, asking me calmly for cigarettes. It really freaked me out, and told him I was calling 911 for him. He immediately ran off, and I gave his description to 911. There wasn't much blood, but the guy clearly needed immediate medical attention. This was in San Jose on an afternoon about 5-6 years ago. Still have that image giving me nightmares to this day. Story 8. My family had the car packed up for a road trip because we were moving across the country from the Pacific Northwest to the Rust Belt. We were heading to the highway to get out of town and had to take some weird access road to get there. On the way, there was some man holding a long barrel rifle to a woman's head, walking through a vegetable garden. He was holding it with one hand and had a cigarette in his mouth. The woman was crying. My mom didn't believe me. I was 14. I know what I saw. Story 9. I once saw a dog walk on two legs across a street. Scared the piss out of me. Story 10. Crossing at a busy intersection and seeing my perfect double walk towards me. We basically eyes locked until we passed each other. A total mind. Even more disturbing, instead of stopping and chatting and being amused by the entire biological coincidence, my immediate subconscious reaction was a massive rising internal rage that someone, somehow, had stolen my face. Very, very weird. Story 11. This is my dad's story, not mine. In the 80s, my dad was in the Peace Corps and lived in Sierra Leone for 3 years. He had a motorcycle, or some sort of motorbike, at least at one point, and would ride around the roads when he had free time. One day, he's riding a dirt road that snakes around a small mountainside or hillside, past some construction works. About half a mile after the roadwork, he sees a man on the side of this dirt road on the mountainside just laughing his butt off, and he was blue. Not like painted blue, but blue. At first, my dad rode on thinking nothing of it, and then it sunk in that he saw a blue dude sitting on the side of a dirt road laughing wildly. He turned around and rode back to where he saw the blue dude, and there was nothing there. He kept retracing his path beyond the roadwork and never saw the blue guy again. Later that day, he went back to the village he was living in at the time and told the locals about what he'd seen. The locals all laughed and said, essentially, "No, you didn't. White men can't see devils." Story 12. My high school girlfriend and her family all talked about the ghost in their house and always said that it sounded like a man wearing boots walking down the hallway. We were all very close, and one day, when they weren't home, I just walked in and went to my girlfriend's room and laid on her bed while I waited for them to get back. A man in boots walked slowly right down the hall, right past the door to my girlfriend's room where I was laying. I did the next logical thing and just climbed out of her bedroom window. They showed up a few minutes later and asked why I was just standing around in the front yard and why I hadn't just gone in. I told them that I heard the ghost and climbed out of the window to escape. They laughed their freaking heads off. Broad daylight, totally creepy and very unexplained. Story 13. I saw a zombie. Naked man, ashy dirty skin, eyes rolled up in his head, stiff limbs, sort of lurking through traffic in Jamaica. I was working in Kingston, Jamaica at that time in the late 80s. I asked my Jamaican crew and they said yes, it was a zombie, but it is a drug, not magic. They said people do this to people for revenge. A few weeks later, I saw another one, an old woman this time. Story 14. I once had a dream I was walking solo down a familiar dirt path towards a wooded area. Side note, the path felt familiar to me in the dream. I had never been down this path before. As I walked towards the wooded area, the feeling of familiarity changed and the path ended at an old abandoned cemetery under the tree canopy. The familiarity suggested the path continued and the cemetery should not be there. I was drawn into the cemetery, toward a specific grave. The detail was vivid. There was an old stone bench next to a sunken grave. The headstone had an angel on top. The remaining wing had a pine needle dangling off, hanging from a cobweb, drifting in the breeze. It was peaceful and quiet. I immediately woke up and felt like the dream was calling me back. I felt oddly connected. The jolt from waking up was so startling, I decided to write the dream down. Fast forward a couple years, I was considering buying a house with my girlfriend. After we reached the house we were considering, the realtor called and said she was running late. While waiting, we walked the outside of the house. Behind the house, we noticed a path past the overgrown grass, going into some woods. To kill time, we decided to walk the path to the trees. While walking along and enjoying the sun on my face, I was hit with an intense feeling of déjà vu. I knew this place. As we reached the woods, there it was, the abandoned cemetery. It was the same cemetery in my dream. I told my girlfriend I'd visited this place in a dream and described specific details down to the pine needle. She thought I was trying to pull a stupid prank until she saw the sunken grave, missing wing, and stone bench, and even the pine needle hanging off the angel's wing. She immediately walked back toward our car. The entire experience was a copy-paste of my dream, with the exception of my girlfriend being present. Later that day, we were back at my house. She asked me how I knew all that detail. I let her read the dream I wrote down. I described the path, trees, cemetery, and weather perfectly. She refused to ever talk about the experience again. That was around 20 years ago. The experience still haunts me to this day. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed today's stories, leave a like, and don't forget to subscribe for more daily stories.